coming, and you actually figure out how to title that property before they come, you can save the client a fortune. And so much so that the client is going to be very, very grateful to you and is going to see you as being their big advisor. Because in the end of the day, you guys get paid when you sell something. We get paid by the minute. And clients don't like paying us by the minute. They really don't, right? So they want to get rid of me as soon as they possibly can. Okay, some of my clients have been around for 20, 30 years, but generally speaking, they want to get rid of me as soon as they possibly can because every time they talk to me, it's costing them. So they need to have a trusted advisor. A lot of the bankers in Miami are international. They know nothing about domestic. I see this every day with my clients who are moving to the US. They're buying properties. They've been advised, hopefully by us or other people, to do it correctly, how to purchase the property. Should they do it through a trust? Should they do an offshore company? Should they do it in personal names? And those things are really important to understand. How to purchase a property 101 is critical. And this all comes into the bigger picture. Simon's absolutely right. If you want to make Florida your domicile, you've got to do it correctly. Just buying the house or getting some advice that tells you to buy the house through an offshore company may not be the answer if you're now trying to get homestead. If you're now trying to make sure that you've got the protections and really being able to say, I'm a Florida resident. All the tax aspects are huge. And you mustn't forget that Florida, you know, you can come to Florida, but if I'm coming from overseas, the days of the Venezuelan saying, look, I'm happy to pay tax in the US on what I earn in the US, and I'll pay tax in Venezuela on what I earn in Venezuela, it doesn't work that way. You pay tax on everything. And therefore, understanding how to do it is critical.
Now, Simon, Beck, you mentioned Asia, and it's interesting because, you know, when we look at tourism, the correlation with real estate, whether it's the Northeast domestically, which is our major market, whether obviously 2/3 of our international business is from South America, and then we get a large portion of Europe, but Asia, and, you know, before the obvious pandemic, was in fact our largest growing market. We have no direct flights, by the way, from Asia, from China, yeah, Japan, but they're finding their way here, and we're also seeing a lot of activity on the meetings and convention side. So that, which is a kind of an entree into making a lot of those business investments. You know, we've talked about these markets that are bringing people here, whether it's to purchase real estate or in my case, tourism. But more specifically, I mean, they've got options within the United States. So it's not just Florida. There are other, you know, very tax-friendly states, you know, so we're always competing. So, you know, and Simon Levin spoke about it a little bit, but, you know, the uniqueness of Miami and Florida and how we are competing. And I'm curious, just some additional thoughts from either one of you of what makes Miami so uniquely positioned to those high net worth customers that we're trying to bring down.
Can I just mention one thing as to the alternative to maybe killing or divorcing your spouse? That there are it's best obviously if a whole family moves together. There are, not to get too technical, but there are situations where actually a husband and a wife or partners can have separate residence and separate domiciles, because often either the wife or the husband wants to go to Florida and play golf all the time, and the other spouse wants to stay in New Jersey and New York, either for business or gardening. I had a wife who wouldn't go to Florida with her husband because she had a garden in New Jersey. But you can set up separate domiciles and residence. Not easily, but you can do it.
Coming to your question as to why, it was interesting, Rolando, you used the word Miami. Now, I have lived in Miami. In fact, I've lived in Miami-Dade. I've lived in Broward. I've lived in, I currently have a beautiful apartment in Brickell Key, which in fact I was there for 3 months until last Saturday when I came back to New York. And I will say, I don't want to make you all jealous about this, but the weather in New York right now is absolute perfection. I'm told that that happens till Thursday. But at the moment we have 78 degrees. It's beautiful, and my wife is just about to walk out the door for a long walk. The last few weeks, as you know, in South Florida has not been so perfection. So you know, give give the Northeast its due for a few weeks of the year, okay? Now, why South Florida? Miami is an international city. Everybody working in Miami knows that. And we all know that Miami has different investors. You've got, people coming from Latin America. They love the coast. They love Miami Beach. They love Brickell. They love the ocean. Interesting, I learned recently, and it'll be interesting to know if any of you have heard this, but many Latin Americans, particularly Brazilians, will not buy used properties. They only want to buy brand new construction, because a used property, I mean, it's crazy to me that people would pay a fortune to have a so-called Manhattan view in Miami, which means looking at another building, whereas they won't buy an apartment on Brickell Key with an ocean view because it's a used property. Go figure. Makes no sense to me. But you've also got, people coming from the Northeast, and in general, the people coming from the Northeast are not necessarily coming to Miami per se, as opposed to Boca, because they want to play golf or they want a boat, right? Face it, whilst there's getting more and more culture, more and more arts in Miami, and that's a wonderful growing. And every time I pass the Arch Center, I'm always awed to see what's going on and the new museums. But in the end of the day, these people have to come down and do stuff. And the answer is it tennis? Is it boating? Is it golf? Miami obviously has some fantastic golf courses. I know because my son has recently taken up golf, and we were at the Miami Beach Golf Club every few days for lessons, once they reopened, of course. But it tends to be the international clients who are focusing more on Miami as a city, because it's international in flavor, multilingual. It tends to be the people from Northeast and these, of course, huge generalities. But when I talk to people in New York, the one word they know of Floridian is Boca, right? They know where Boca is. They know where the golf courses are. They know where the beaches are. So you aren't getting different audiences. And I do think that's important to understand, because when it comes to how they're moving and what kind of tax planning they should be doing and what kind of structuring they should be doing, it's not one size fits all. I just saw a chat asking about Chile. Just to be clear, planning for a Chilean is different from planning from a Venezuelan, which is different from a Brazilian, which is different from someone from New York or New Jersey. It's all different. And so knowing your audience is very important. And whilst I do know a couple of New Yorkers who did move down to the Icon building on Brickell, they love it because they say, we're the only Anglos in our building. I'm sure that's not true, but that's what they say, right? Every time I go for a walk around Brickell Key, I wave to them on their balcony. But the reality is that it's different horses for different courses.
Rolando, can I sum it up?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because I now tell people, my friends and clients in the Northeast, we basically call Miami and Miami Beach Manhattan with palm trees. That you have the golf, you have the tennis, but you have extraordinary culture, restaurants. You can live in it, and either a house or a condo, and you can walk to almost everything if you're in the right area. There are certain ones where great condos you may not be able to, but South Beach, North Beach, certainly downtown, and yes, you have to know the difference, but as I understand our group and our audience here, we're not talking about necessarily, you may be selling Boca Raton, but Miami and Miami Beach has everything that they do, and you don't have to go to bed at 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Look, I actually think, Simon, you're right on there, because if I'm...
We lost somebody.
Simon Beck.
If someone who's been living in Manhattan for the last 4 or 5 years, and they're used to... Am I still there? Okay. Somebody who's been living in Manhattan for the last 30 years doesn't want to be living and having nothing to do. Somebody who's been living in Westchester or New Jersey or Connecticut might be much happier up in Palm Beach County. So I do think that is important, because it sounds great if you've been used to living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Manhattan to have a 5-bedroom house with a pool. But it gets very, very old if you don't actually have much to do and you're used to walking. So again, guiding people to the right places, I think it is critical. You want to get to the security issue, because you did raise it, Rolando, which is traditionally, if you go back 25, 30 years, Miami was not viewed as a safe area. Today it is. Today Miami does. And of course, depending where you are in Florida, do you have a gated community? Do you not have a gated community? And obviously there's, plenty of discussions about the advantage of gated versus non-gated. Obviously, if you are in the Brickell area or in South Beach, there's plenty of beautiful condos which, have all the security. So security, I don't think it's a personal or physical security any longer. Hurricanes, I remember Wilma, and I remember my youngest son is 15, so I know it was 15 years ago. I remember when we were having 4 hurricanes a year in South Florida, right? And let's not forget, the pandemic in the Northeast today will be history in 2 years' time, right? Hurricanes, I wouldn't like to say they hardly ever happen. They're happening more, and they're becoming more intense. So the security issue, I think, is, if I'm a Latin American, Florida is secure. It's all relative, is the point I'm making.
Yeah. One of the things that we were talking about, Miami Beach, and I've been at this for a long time, and I've lived in the heart of the city. As a kid growing up, I was delivering newspapers on bicycle on Brickell Avenue, and I've seen the evolution of both the city of Miami Beach and now Miami. So when we're out there promoting this community to the world, downtown Miami has truly become a vibrant place within an amazing place. And as I always talk to our partners on the city of Miami Beach, and the success and the rise of downtown Miami, and of course Wynwood, and all those experiences with the museums is a great addition to our community that draws tourists and of course investors and people that want to buy real estate. And I'm curious if the activity, I think you've already spoken to this, but there is a increased amount of activity in the core of the city for quite some time now, for a different type of customer. Is that not the case?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, I remember watching Brickell Key being built. If anybody remembers that movie, Something About Sally, perhaps I got the name wrong.
Something About Mary.
Something About Mary, that's the one.
Mary,
that's
Sally.
Right. So, okay, Sally, Mary, same thing. It ends up with a Y. Anyway, so Something About Mary, you'll see if you watch that movie, you can actually see Brickell Key being built. And once upon a time, I was working in the 701 building, which, and my office directly looked, and I was watching these buildings going up. And your thought was, who would want to live in Brickell? What was there? Once everybody went home in the evening, there was nothing there. Now, how many 5-star hotels are within half a mile distance of Brickell Key? Just think that through for a second. Between the Marriott Marquis, the Mandarin, which of course is on Brickell Key, the Four Seasons, the East. I can keep going. You've got the 2 SLSs now. There are more 5-star hotels in Brickell or just across the bridge than there are in Manhattan. So you could see this massive change, almost like the epicenter of where do people want to be, even as a tourist, even as someone visiting, has so fundamentally changed. The Brickell City Center, which I still think has a way to go, but the Brickell City Center is incredible. So the fact is, people want to move to downtown Miami because you could live in downtown Miami like you can live in Manhattan without a car. You don't need one.
And you have great New York restaurants that you can get a reservation at.
Yeah.
We're about to wrap up and open it up to Q&A, but I know as residents of this community, the transit, mobility, traffic, and to your point, it's all relative. We're in the thick of it, and obviously Simon Beck's up in New York. We probably have people in Bogota and Rio, and so to what extent transit and I know there's some great plans. It looks like finally we've got a real tangible plan that's going to connect downtown Miami and Miami Beach. It still has a ways to go, but there's a lot of activity on that front. But to what extent is that influencing the clients that you're seeing, and how often, if at all, does it come up from your perspectives? And we'll wrap it up on that and open it up on Q&A.
Well, let me just divert just a slight bit.
Sure.
Don't forget that when you come to Florida, you have to change your estate planning documents, because Florida has, even though they don't have taxes, they have a probate system that's a little bit more onerous than the Northeast. So you have to do estate planning documents that are different than you have in the North. Revocable trust as will substitutes, and they have different rules as to who can be your professional representative. That's what we call an executor down here. So you can't use your lawyer or accountant from New York. It has to be either a blood relative or a Florida resident or a Florida institution.
No, that's actually a very good point. We've just been doing a pro bono project, and I'm just announcing this in case anybody's interested, where we were putting together documents for frontline workers, which were all the, and we're now helping the American Nurses Association on key estate planning documents. I mean, guardianships, healthcare surrogates, things like that, for nurses. I
think we may have temporarily lost Simon Beck. See, we even have better internet service down here in Miami.
And if you do. This is key. This is Manhattan at its best. Anyway, I changed the picture just to get down to more to Miami flavor for you. But the point was that the documents are completely different. And Simon Levin is 100% right. If you are a realtor and you want to have a client for life and you want to have the referrals, the best thing you can do is introduce your clients to the right people, whether it's don't just go to the immigration lawyer. If it's someone from Latin America, you need the tax attorney, because if they do the immigration first and tax second, they've got a major problem. How they purchase the house, they need a tax attorney. It's very, very key that if you control those invites and you introduce them to the right people, not only will you have a client for life, but you'll also have all the referrals from that client because you know the right people.
You know, let's close it on that for now, and let's not worry too much about the traffic, God willing. But
hey, Rolando, I wanted to actually say something back with what Simon was saying. He was talking about golfing and boating. And first of all, Miami has amazing boating. I would just like to say I think way better than Boca. But my husband is a yacht broker. And the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, the phone did not ring, not once. And it was a little terrifying for us because we're like, oh my gosh, how long will it be before people are even thinking about buying a boat or a yacht? 2 weeks later, his phone has not stopped because people in droves, and I don't just mean locally, but people in the Northeast, people from South America are buying and putting a boat or a yacht here because it is pretty much the only thing you can still do that's social distancing, but yet you can have fun. So there is some correlation between that and the real estate.
100%. My apartment in Brickell Key looks south, and I can see all the boats heading out to the ocean. And I agree with 100% ago. If I looked at a month ago, there was a trickle of boats because they closed all the boat ramps. Now, all I can say is I have never seen so many boats, one after the other. So you're absolutely right. And once again, how do you buy a boat, and in whose name do you buy a boat, and do you buy the name of a company and all that kind of stuff? That's critical. Once again, do you need a trust?
Exactly.
Rolando, we should mention the Bright Line. It's the most extraordinary train in the United States, and we have it.
Yeah, it is. And like I said earlier, without getting too far into the traffic woes and the weeds, but there are some encouraging steps that will make Miami and South Florida even more attractive. Our transportation, whether it's Brightline and we've been in close contact with them, even though they've paused service, they are full steam ahead. They're building those tracks to Orlando and beyond. We talked about the monorail system that has taken the next step in connecting downtown Miami with Miami Beach. So all these things are boding well from, of course, the tourism perspective, and definitely from selling a slice of paradise to folks from all those places that the Simons and others have talked about. So I think there's going to be some questions that may have been gleaned from the chat group that either Danny or Mirielle are pulling. Is that correct?
I will let Danny get ready with the questions from the chat. I just wanted to throw this out real quick, another little comment that I saw, and I want to give it to Edward, since Edward is our resident agent on the ground in Manhattan. Last week, it looks like Mayor de Blasio was asked about tabling plans to raise taxes on the wealthy over fears of driving people out of Manhattan. And his comment was, the rich keep getting richer, even in the midst of this crisis. So I absolutely believe this is a fair time to talk about higher taxes on the wealthy. So exactly the opposite. How have you seen your clients react to that, Edward? You're gonna have to unmute yourself.
There we go. So yes, no, absolutely. And it's one of the things when you're looking at the Manhattan market over the last 4 years, we've been sliding down in pricing. Part is a supply and demand story, but the other part has been what we call a policy-driven reset. You know, as somebody said earlier, the SALT tax deduction went away. We got higher mansion taxes that went from a flat 1% on any purchase above $1 million to a sliding scale all the way into the 3% above the $20 million point. So yes, tax-wise, it's been unfriendly, which has helped drive this gradual downtrend over the last 4 years. We are basically back at 2012, 2013 pricing levels. And in January, February, we saw finally the market picking up. We saw more activity. We saw more action in open houses. As brokers, we were like, yes, finally, after 4 years. And then we got this. You know, so currently there is not a lot going on in the city. We're running at around 15% of normal transaction volume. So it's very hard to see what's going to happen coming out of this, which should be, by the way, hopefully in about 2 weeks. What we are seeing, though, is a lot of people, I see a lot of action with our colleagues to the east of myself in Long Island, in the Hamptons, north in the Hudson Valley, and west in Jersey, where people are not so much fleeing New York City, but they're buying additional real estate just to have a getaway place. So yes, those types of things from our current administration about taxing those on the top of the food chain even higher is not going to help our luxury segment here for sure. So that's, you know, it's another step in this long-term policy-driven reset that is just not favorable. You know, we had a long discussion here about pied-à-terre taxes in the city, right, where the local officials wanted to instate a tax for those that don't live here permanently. Thank goodness that was tabled, and they came up with this higher mansion tax. But you're correct; it's not going to help here. I lost you there.
Mirielle, you're muted.
You're muted, Muriel.
You were muted.
Sorry, our previous chairman of the board, Michael Goldberg, is on, and Edward, he has a question for you.
Great.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Just want to make sure.
Thank you for being here, Michael.
Thank you. Michael Goldberg, Senior Vice President of Iberia Bank, Miami Beach, and a past chair of the chamber. 3 generations born and raised in Miami Beach. And I'm saying that because the question is, you know, and you know, all of us love the people coming from New York down to South Florida, and all of us in our respective industries, it helps us. And of course we thrive on that, and it's actually a great thing. But, you know, having 2 kids that were basically raised on Miami Beach, my son went to Wharton and graduated. And of course, you know, that generation, he's in New York, of course, he had a job, and he's in Manhattan. He's been there for about a year. And my daughter, who is going to be a senior at UF, is also looking to go to New York. She actually was supposed to do an internship in New York this summer for a number of bank, but they're allowing her to do it remotely, which leads to my question. With the wealth that's leaving New York, and this probably is good for Edward and or Simon, you know, that's going to have to be replaced. And from what I see with my own kids and other friends of theirs, the last place that my kids want to wind up is South Florida. You know, the big sexy thing is to go to New York. They love it there. And I would see that as the next generation of wealth in New York. So I guess, you know, to Simon and Edward, are you starting to see that and give some feedback on the millennials' penetration of relocating to New York to replace some of this generational wealth and people that are moving to South Florida.
Sure, and I think that's actually a very interesting point. If you look at what is attracting people to New York, it's historically been obviously Wall Street and the finance industry. And if you look over the last few years, we have now become the largest tech city with the most amount of tech workers. I think the numbers right now, Simon, correct me if I'm wrong, we have about 350-something thousand people in Manhattan working in tech. And the usual suspects from Google to Facebook to Twitter, etc. Even though, you know, you might argue now there is new work from home policies that may shift that, but we are now officially the tech hub of the US, no question asked. I think Palo Alto is like not even a third of the amount of tech jobs that we have. So to answer your question, I think you see a shift from maybe the old Wall Street, you know, driver to more tech driven. When I look, you know, I also run commercial real estate. If I look at certain hubs of New York City, let's say in Chelsea or in the Chelsea market area, where office rents used to be historically low and not attractive, all of a sudden Google buys a whole building as an office, and every tech company wants to be in that area. And office rents have, you know, pre-pandemic doubled there in no time. So I think that's a driving factor for your question, Michael.
I think. Oh, go on, Simon.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's some truth to that, a lot of truth, that your new millennials and that generation over several generations have been attracted to New York. One of the reasons is that Miami, let's say Miami, has not had, for example, it's been international banking, but not investment banking, you know, traditional investment banking. I think right now I have seen and read about a large number of hedge funds relocating to Miami now because everything can be done remotely, and they are not more than just directed towards South America. That because of the taxes, they're relocating down here. And I have seen my clients have gone from individuals moving down to entire businesses moving down. And I had a bond investment bank move. They didn't come to Miami, they went to Sarasota. Not here to promote Sarasota, but the concept is, and they had 40 employees in the operations group, all making over $100,000. And they said they offered them all jobs they could move. And these are young people, or spanning the whole really age group, but mostly young. 35 of the 40 moved to Sarasota. And when you say, it was interesting when I had this, mentioned the Star Ledger interview, the woman pointed out to me and she said, well, in that time, and this is not true anymore, but she said, New Jersey's population, how can I be right? New Jersey's population increased by 50,000 people in that particular year. And I said, yes, you had 150,000 people come in making $50,000 or less, and you had 100,000 people move out making $100,000 or more. And the people who tend to move out are people who are much more involved in society because they have the time and the money. So it's charity, it's philanthropy, politics, census count for House of Representatives, social. It's amazing. So I do find, yes, New York is a magnet. I think that's going to change a little bit. And after they're in New York a few years and they have a great social life and they get married, they move to Connecticut. The first step is they move to Connecticut, for a house or whatever it is. But no, it's developing an interest.
I think we're living in fascinating times because before the pandemic, just to take what Ed was saying, the Google, Facebook, Twitter were buying up huge parts of Soho, of Chelsea, of Hudson Yards, excuse me, particularly Hudson Yards in New York.
Right.
If you look at South Florida, if you're in Miami, if you don't speak Spanish or Portuguese, international banking is not going to be for you, right? You can obviously join a local bank, that's absolutely fine. But if you're looking for that sort of, if you're looking for that big sort of sexy appeal, You're going to need to have, you know, a connection to Latin America. End of story. All the major banks are heavily Latin American focused. It doesn't mean that there aren't jobs in Morgan Stanley and there aren't jobs for domestic, but they tend to be fewer and far between. If you're going into medical, South Florida, you couldn't get better. Anything to do with the medical industry, South Florida is key. But young people are frankly fed up of working remotely from home. They like to be connected. They like to have restaurants and theaters. And obviously right now in Manhattan, nobody's terribly happy because everything is closed. There's nothing to do. But I think Michael is absolutely correct that when you're talking about Manhattan, as opposed to New Jersey or Connecticut or elsewhere, Manhattan is going to be a magnet. It's still going to be a magnet for the young entrepreneurs, for the young tech people who are earning a lot of money. Will they then make their money and move to Connecticut, move to South Florida? Absolutely. But the amount of highly paid skilled jobs, and I'm not talking jobs that pay 100,000 plus, I'm talking about jobs that pay $1 million plus, are not going to be in Miami, they're going to be in Manhattan. So I think it's you know, this umbilical cord between New York and Miami, which I've experienced for the last 25 years in my career, is always going to be there. And I think it's a very healthy umbilical cord because the connection, and during the pandemic, the figures show that the number one place that people went was out to Long Island, to the Hamptons. The number two place was upstate New York. The number three place was Miami and Miami Beach.
You nailed it.
So, you know, there is a strong umbilical connection, but as my son said to me when we got back to Manhattan on Saturday, he said, I can't get a bagel anywhere else than in New York. You know, a Miami bagel is not the same. So my advice to my Miami, to all my friends and long-term friends in Miami, we've got to do something about the bread in Miami, particularly the bagels and the challah because bread stores don't seem to exist in Miami in the way they do exist in New York. Perhaps this is a new business. I need to get out of law and get into bread. Or make some bread.
Simon, I'll give you some great bagel and bread places.
Same here.
I'll take you
I
out.
heard it's all about the water.
New York.
There you go. Someone just said that. Bread is about the New York water. Perhaps we need to bring the New York water down because we need to do something.
There are pizza places on the beach that are from Brooklyn that bring their own water.
And they're
down
good.
here.
That's
and
true.
It's very good. However, we eat a lot less carbs, so we're not worried about the bread. We've got to worry about our bikinis.
I worry about the bread.
Well,
I never tend to go out with my bikini. People ask me not to.
Well, I know we're pushing up against the time. I'm going to turn it over to Mirielle to close out, but I personally wanted to thank, obviously, Simon, and Edward. It's always, you know, we're here to support the real estate industry. If we keep doing our job well, hopefully we'll keep generating interest on people buying into this amazing community and destination that we call home. So I guess I'll turn it back to Mirielle.
All right. Thank you, Rolando. And yes, thank you, Simons and Edward, for being here today. Thank you to my new co-chair, Mario. I'm so excited to have you with us. Thank you to Danny for going through this. We had to go through this a few times to get this all set up. I just want to remind everybody that was here today, if you found this panel to be valuable, please join us again next month, the second Tuesday of the month at 8 a.m. We'll be on here. We don't have our guests figured out yet, so we're always interested in hearing feedback from all of you. Who would you like to see? What topic would you like for us to cover? Is there somebody you'd like to introduce me to and said, hey, this might be a great person? Because we're always looking for great speakers with relevant topics. So thank you so much. If your question wasn't answered in the chat, we'll be sure to get back to you. Anybody else have any final words? Nope, we're all good. All right. Thank you guys so much. Go make it a great day. The sun's actually shining today, so the weather is beautiful. So go out and enjoy yourself.
You.
Have a good day.
All
All right.
Bye.
Thank you guys.